Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Richmond Water and Sewer Commission on May 1st. Happy spring, everybody. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of rain so the grass can start growing. Before we begin, would anybody care to make a public comment? Hearing none, seeing none, moving on, jumping into our warrant agenda. Any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
Sure.
Okay. So we have begun a relationship with a new certified operator. Josh, did you want to lead that?
Yeah, so as we talked about the last meeting, we needed to hire a certified operator in order to stay in compliance with the state for the wastewater treatment facility. They gave us a 6-month grace period with Alan as the operator in charge, but he didn't have the licensing that was necessary to run the wastewater treatment facility. So after those 6 months, he tried to test a couple times, came very, very close. I know he'll try again. But in the interim, we have hired Simon Operating Systems to provide the certified wastewater treatment facility operator necessary. Joining us this evening is Nate Frederick from Simon Operation Systems to introduce himself and answer any questions. But Nate began on site here about 2 weeks ago. This is his third week. We have 8 hours per week of Nate on site with the staff going over the facility. And Nate is also, and the team at Simon is also on call for any calls that the staff might have if there's anything that they come upon. So a really good resource, I think, for the entire staff. So turn over to Nate for an introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nate. I work for Simon. I've been working for Simon Operation Services for, well, it's been since 2006. And I'm a 5 domestic and for wastewater and 4 class 4 for water systems. And you guys are currently using my services as a 5 domestic for wastewater once a week. And I've split that up into actually 2 days, half days, so I can get a better view of the process at the wastewater treatment system. And it's nice to meet Steve and Brad and Alan and Josh, and I'm looking forward to working with you guys until Alan gets his license.
Well, thank you, Nate. Do you have any questions for us?
No, I figured I'd sit in for a little bit and just watch you guys talk about some of the budget items, if you don't mind. And then if any questions come up, feel free to reach out. Josh and all of the guys at the wastewater treatment facility have my information. And you can also go on to the Simon Operation Services website, where you'll find my contact information there as well.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
So, Nate, we're very glad to have you. I could go look at the website and get your contact information, I guess, but I was wondering, just out of curiosity, where do you live? Where are you coming in from?
I live in Montpelier.
Okay. The reason I ask is because, as you know, sewer mains never break at convenient times. We're grateful to have you on call, but we'll try not to call you out at 2 o'clock in the morning if we can help it.
I'm quite used to that. I cover a lot of territory in the central Vermont area, and I've had my fair share of sewer and also water main breaks. So nothing phases me too much anymore. But that's what's fun about working in this industry. There's always some fun surprises occasionally.
We won't disappoint. Any questions or comments for Nate? Okay. Well, Nate, thank you. And if you have any questions for us as the meeting goes along, please feel free to speak up, and we want to hear you and look forward to working with you.
Great. It's good to see all of you.
So Josh, speaking of water main breaks, I understand we had a water main break on Cochran Road.
Well, not quite water
Sewer
line,
main.
it's a sewer line.
That's
So
even better, right?
I will actually,
Oh, yeah.
I'll actually turn this over to Steve. He was on site and responded very quickly.
Actually, I have a piece of the material and you can observe and see what happened. So it's the forced main that goes towards the end of the last 12 houses on Cochran Road. it was bedded in really nice sand. With one exception of a stone. Right
Mm.
beside the pipe.
But this is, I know that we're gonna replace it with the same, is it same material but a bigger diameter?
We're not replacing it.
That's new pipe.
So,
Oh,
that-
this is,
well, so the project that we're working on, for next summer is actually a water line replacement.
water line.
And this
okay.
is sewer.
sewer. Got it.
This
I
is
got the-
sewer.
Right.
So in researching this stuff is really brittle. And when I mean, that was probably a section that was like a foot long.
Mhm.
We ended up having to take a 5-foot section out by the time, because every time we tried to cut it, it just kept breaking. And it's really brittle. And when we went and talked to EJP, they said that stuff was was around in the 70s.
Mhm.
Done away with in the 90s most places. Apparently Richmond put it in the 90s.
Mm.
So,
So if we were to do it now, we would not use that. Got it.
no,
So
But-
this is not PVC?
it is, but it's a very brittle type. I mean, they said that most places have gone away from it. They don't even, I mean, use it or have it in service anymore. I mean, you can see where the stone had been rubbing right against the edge of it and cracked it. And then, you know, when the contractor started cutting it, it just kept breaking.
Yeah.
And so,
Heidi?
So what are we using now for?
well, we replaced the piece that we took out with PVC, but it's still currently being used. I mean, it's the last 12 houses on that all have individual pump stations. This is a force main that dumps into our manhole, I think the last manhole down Cochran Road.
So is that the one that they're talking about replacing? No.
No.
So that project we've been talking about is a water line project.
Okay.
So we don't, this isn't really on the
But
radar just yet, but it will be now.
it might be something that we should discuss if we're digging up the road at the same time.
But there's quite a separation
Right.
between water and wastewater. So how far would the new
Well, the problem
freshwater
is,
pipe be?
we're
from
not
where-
sure how far the water and wastewater are apart on Cochran Road because of the ledge.
Okay,
This particular spot was the first jut out of ledge on Cochran Road. So this was on the far side of the road.
Okay.
And I assume they put the water line over there too somewhere, but we don't really know.
so accepting rocks, what's the service life of that PVC?
Like I said, when I talked with EJP about it, they said that most of this type of material was put in the 70s and 80s. And most people have taken it out in the 90s when Richmond put it in.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it was a material that was chosen because it was cheap.
I hope not.
You know, I just don't know. I just think we should really, I mean, that's why I kept the piece of it, because it was obvious there was a rock there.
What's the pressure PSI
You know, I don't know. It says on the pipe, the bigger piece there, it says it will withstand 200 PSI.
oh wow.
This is forced main.
It is
It's low
forced main.
pressure. It's enough to push it.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I guess it's really was my question, I guess, is what pressure are we moving fluids through it?
It has had
This was
pressure.
noticed by somebody, the leak was noticed by somebody walking by. And it actually it was coming out of the ground about a foot high when we got there.
Yeah.
And had been for a couple of days.
I guess all the grinder pumps are trying to push.
Yeah.
Their fluent through the line and.
Yeah.
So another project,
Well, I think we should, yeah, I mean, you don't want to dig up Cochran Road twice.
No. How many linear feet of that do we have?
I don't know.
Okay.
We could measure it out.
Josh, can we check to see what the plans say we put in for that?
Well, we can look, yeah, I can look that up.
And I guess follow up on. I want to say get estimates on what estimates would cost.
Yeah,
Well, we need to, I think, hire an engineer.
yeah.
We need.
Did we get
you know,
Tyler involved?
Tyler to get in there, look at the plan, see how much we have, see what it
Yeah.
would cost. He
Yeah.
can do up an engineer scope of work, go out to bid. Gotta do the process.
I mean, I was just amazed how brittle this stuff was once they started trying to cut it, and they're like.
I'm a
they just-
layman, but I wasn't aware of PVC having that short service life and that much of an issue with
Yeah.
being brittle.
It just happens to be the type of material. And when I asked EJP, they were like, yeah, that stuff. Because I took it in to make sure I got the right size splices and stuff and, they're like, yeah, that stuff. We haven't seen that for a long time.
So what are the chances that since this was disturbed, we're going to see a future failure near that break?
I hope not, because it really was bedded well in sand. It was almost pure sand, the whole digging. And then when the excavator got down to where the pipe was, they hand shoveled it. And he's like, look at this. And there was a rock right here on the back side of it.
Now, is that something the frost pushed into the right of way there?
It seemed to be, it could have been fallen back in when they originally done it. I don't know, but it was pure sand that it had been bedded in. It looked like a good bed, looked like had been done right. Just happened to get one stupid rock right up against the pipe.
And how far down below grade was that?
About 5 feet
Okay.
by the time right around 5 feet. I mean, it was down far enough. And like I say, it was actually out of the lane of road and it was on the far side, on the opposite side of the ledge.
But it was coming a foot out of the ground. It's like,
Well, when anybody's house pumped, it would come spraying right up.
wow.
And it was quite obvious. We limed the whole area after they were done. They cleaned up as much as they could. We limed the whole area that was affected. And then we posted for 48 hours above and below any access points to the river. Just, keep it, that's requirement for the state.
Yeah.
So.
Would anybody back there like, I see a lot of people kind of going, do you want to pass that around?
I don't need to touch the septic pipe. I appreciate that.
Why not?
I appreciate that. Septic pipe.
Well, it's up here if you change your mind. Well, Steve, thanks. We appreciate you guys getting on that.
Okay. Consideration of approval of, nope. Consideration of recommending that the select board approve the drinking water state revolving fund planning application for water service line inventory. So we just talked about sewer. This is water service line inventory.
So this is the one that we talked about a few meetings ago with MSK engineers. They would help us do the service line inventory, which is being required by the state to be completed by next fall. They've given us a proposal for $43,300. That will be fully covered by funds from the TWSRF revolving fund. The process for that is they essentially give us a loan, which is then 100% forgiven. So the process for the loan is the select board has to approve that loan, and typically we've asked the commission to make a recommendation to the select board that they approve that loan, and it is on the select board's agenda for later this evening as well.
So as Josh mentioned, this isn't an optional thing. The state is mandating that this inventory be done, but this board doesn't have the authority to borrow money. So we would ask the select board to do that.
Right. So the state is basically trying to get ahead for once for all of how much lead is down there. Yeah.
And for once,
This comes down from the EPA.
and this is actually a funded mandate because they're giving us money to actually produce it.
Mhm.
So
As opposed to what we frequently see, an unfunded mandate.
exactly. So in a way, it's helpful.
So this is just inventory. This is, next phase is replacement.
Correct. And these are all private lines. So I would have to see what would happen there, but it's the private service line, essentially from the curb stop to the house. So we have to, but once we identify what that is, and there's a lot of information, it's not just, what is it? There's like, what, 30 or 40 different things that they have to fill out about
Yeah.
that service line, which is why an engineer is really helpful. But then, yes, next phase would be, once you know what you have, what you do about that. That's not clear just yet.
Okay.
So I'm looking for a recommendation, a move to recommend that the select board approve the drinking water state revolving loan fund application in the amount of $43,300.
Yes.
Moved by Morgan,
I second.
seconded by Aaron. Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Jay, I.
Morgan, I.
Aaron, I.
And David, I. The motion has passed 4-0. Okay, moving on. Consideration of approval of a water allocation for 22 Depot Street. The engineers for the project at 22 Depot Street incorrectly calculated the amount of water allocation that they needed when they came before this commission in March. They need an additional 280 gallons per day. We do have a letter in the packet. We also have Dan Noyes joining us tonight. Josh?
Dan's a separate property. We have
Oh.
Derek from the engineering firm.
Right, this
Oh,
is
okay.
Depot, not railroad.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. So did you want to speak before Derek or?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, if Derek wants to add any more details, he can.
No, I just made a mistake and kind of just used the same wastewater numbers for both calculations and should have used the higher water flows based on the state regs. So apologize for having to waste your time to come back.
Okay, thank you, Derek. So we're looking for a motion to approve a wastewater allocation of 280 gallons per day for 22 Depot Street. This is in addition to the 960 gallons per day that were approved at the February 28th meeting of the Water and Sewer Commission.
And that hinges of they are in compliance with stormwater.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, they did that. You did that
Yeah.
clarification last time, and I think that they fully are aware of that.
I move to approve the amendment to increase the water allocation to of 280 gallons per day to the permit.
Thank you, Morgan. Do we have a second?
Aaron, I second.
Thank you, Aaron. Moved by Morgan, seconded by Aaron. Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, I.
Morgan, I.
Aaron, I.
And David, I. Motion has passed 4 in favor, not opposed.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, so that is done. Review of list of water and wastewater items to be repaired or replaced. So the updated list is in the packet. Staff have addressed the critical needs and continues to work on the whole list.
As you'll notice, I continue to meet with the full staff at least once a week to go through this list and other items in water and wastewater. I think you'll know, oh, let me share the list. Yeah, thank you. Jay. Yep. So those that are scoring at home will probably notice that we haven't crossed a lot of things off the list recently. But reason for that is we took initially at the beginning, addressed a lot of the critical items really fast and we're able to address some of the other items that are a little simpler. And then let me, yeah. And then as you'll notice too, there's a lot of items here that we have third parties that need to come in. So you'll see Tom Allen and Dan Pratt, a few others. So we are also waiting on some of their availability to come in and help us kind of give us next steps. So, and we are still continuing to address things and some of them just take longer to like, the backwash pump is, not fully completed yet, but we have incremental progress every week and I'll let Steve provide some more details.
So just because an item is still on the list, that doesn't mean nothing has been done to address that.
Correct. Yeah. So I started putting things down here that are things that we've checked off the list because it feels good to check things off the list and make movement. But I just want to note that we'll continue to add like, okay, this is where we're at with these processes this week, and this is sort of our next steps. And again, Steve can probably add some, and maybe even more is happening since we spoke last week.
Yeah, actually, I, so we had Dan Pratt come in and take care of all the electrical problems that we were dealing with. Still not 100% sure one of the things got addressed properly, but he's gonna come back and check it out again. The one problem we're having right now is with our Tom Allen, who does all of our calibrations and all of the sensor stuff. He's really overloaded and we're having problems getting even in contact with him. So we're beginning to put feelers out to maybe bring somebody else on. I hate to because he knows the system, but if we can't get him, then what good is it? But so, both of the two influent pumps now have check valves on each side of them. So those can be operated without manually going down and turning the valves open. So that gives Alan the ability to monitor SCADA at home and change from valve to valve, pump to pump without having to manually be at the plant. We've drained one of the clarifiers, cleaned it all out. We're gonna switch over to it tomorrow. Then we'll drain the other one and completely clean it out. The fish tank is down to about a foot. The fish are still swimming. But we anticipate towards the end of this week, opening the valve, draining that out, and start cleaning it and assessing the valve damage that we have to correct so that that tank can be brought back online.
Have they found a home?
Not yet. But they're still there. Yeah, Dan, like I said, Dan Pratt's came and addressed some problems. We've had a mixer go down in the anoxic chamber in the headworks area. We ordered a new one. It's 12 weeks out, won't be here. I've got confirmation that it'll be in this country on July 17th.
Is that from Sweden?
Yes, it is. In the meantime, we had sent the old one out to Mativiers to check and see. I got confirmation today. No, it's not worth even trying to rebuild. He said the parts, just the parts to rebuild it are the same cost as the new one. So
I know from personal experience, finding Swedish parts can be hard.
so, yeah, so we're addressing problems as they come up, but we're still trying to move forward with it.
So what's the highest priority item on that list now?
Right now, it's, I believe it's, well, we really need to get Tom Allen or somebody for control specialties on board. And next in line is cleaning out the plant as far as the grit that's accumulated in all of the, it's a staggering fee of what they have estimated the cost to be.
I remember the last time we did it, I couldn't believe the cost.
We're looking at $40,000 with $70,000 worth of disposal on top of that for the grit that comes out. It was just mind boggling.
Where does the grit go?
Has to be, some of it could go to, most of it would end up having to go to Coventry. Has to go to a landfill. It can't just be disposed of. Middlebury has drying beds, and they dry it, but their problem is the amount that we have, there's no way that they could do that. They have small drying beds that they could do. One of the things that they've talked about is that they would bring dumpsters in, we would fill the dumpsters, and then they would have to sit here for a certain length of time to dry a little bit before they truck them to Coventry. It's been so long since the plant has really been cleaned. We really don't know how much we're doing. I told Josh last time that we discussed this, that I really think we should just start with the two the two aerated basins that collect septage, because they seem that's where we're incurring the most. The pumps and stuff plug up almost daily, and we have to, spend an hour and a half every morning getting them unplugged so we can operate for the day, just from the grit that's there and the rags. So
Plus, it's not doing the pumps any favors.
no. So we would like to start with those two basins and, we can clean one out and we would be taking septage with just one basin and our digester. So we would be limiting us on how much we could take, but we could still operate the plant with one of the basins at a time. And then once we get the first one clean, we could switch to that one and go to the other basin and clean that one. That's where I'd like to start.
Heidi?
So where are we, because I didn't see on the list of where are we, because you're talking about the haulers and that being a crucial part. Where are we with getting the meters for the haulers coming in? Are they-
Question.
There's a trade show that's May 11th that we're going to. And I anticipate having a lot more answers about septage receiving bay. And the meter and stuff for that. Phil Laramie was gonna get me some information and he's just really busy. He hasn't been able to. So we're gonna put feelers out because the trade show is at Lake Maury and anybody in the wastewater industry is there and water industry. So we'll have the ability to go to a lot of different places and get people who are in the business and have the stuff that we want to come in and then come up and assess what kind of cost it's gonna take. I don't anticipate it being a big cost. The SCADA system actually has a place in it for septage flows. I don't understand why it was never ever used.
Yeah.
Or hooked up. So I think we have the computer aspect of it. It's just a matter of getting the meters and stuff. But it is on the list.
Moving forward on that.
Yeah.
Making sure we're moving forward on that one.
It is not forgot by any means.
So June, what did I say? July 30th, I'm expecting that one.
So we'll get information this month and then something actionable next month.
Yeah.
Denise?
Denise Barnard. I noticed that the list has been updated as of April 26th. Can you tell me when was this checklist made? And how
We
did that
started
come to
in
be?
mid-March or somewhere around there.
early March.
Is when we started. There were major problems with the plant. The biggest one was the fact that we were operating with only one influent pump, supposed to be two. And that we had been operating with only one influent pump for about 2 months. If the state had ever come in, they would have mandatorily had us rent pumps. We got one for free. It's in place, it's operating, it's running tonight. So we have done a tremendous amount of work to get the plant operational. And we can maintain it right now, but going forward, there's got to be some major upgrades and we're hopefully there's a 20-year engineering study and an upgrade. We're just trying to hold together till then.
Gonna go with Angela and then come back to you, Heidi. Angela, go ahead.
Hi there, Angela Cote. I had a chance, this is kind of some anecdotal information, a little bit of actual observational data that I collected on Thursday, April 20th, when I took a tour of the plant regarding the metering, proposed metering of our septage that our haulers are bringing in. I think that you should make that a priority for this budget that you've got for this next fiscal year. I understand that they would like to go to the trade show on the 11th and put their feelers out. Anecdotally, from my observational data, the reporting from the haulers, each truck driver pulls up and they are filling out basically a photocopy of a form. They're not putting all of the data required on the form. So those fields are being left blank. Things like the capacity of the truck and the driver's name may or may not be there, but the date and the name of the hauler are, and the capacity that was offloaded from the truck. Anecdotally, when the driver was asked what he was doing, he reported that he had pumped 5 septic tanks that morning. And then when you look at the corresponding sheet after the driver left, he only reported discharging 2,000 gallons of septage. So at a minimum, from that one example, you are under by 20%. And if those 5 tanks were greater than or closer to 1,000 gallons, that's over 100% underreported. That one truck. And while I was there for my tour, I got there a little early. All 3 of their operating personnel were over at the town offices, so the door was locked. I have no idea if you could have had a hauler show up and discharge and not fill out one of those forms. No idea. So that metering system, whether it connects to SCADA properly or whatever, there should be a way for you to bill directly from that metering system without involving a lot of human hands. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I have my
Heidi,
hand up first.
Oh, go ahead.
In response to Denise's question, I'm not going to do the 20-minute version, but Steve here finally came to Josh with some concerns that he had some months back, and we found out that virtually everything our previous superintendent had told us was not true. And we did an end-to-end inspection with all of us bit by bit going through. We all went at different times, and it was really disturbing. There were a number of places in that plant where one bad day, the entire plant could have been non-operational. And so, as Steve pointed out, some of this has to be taken care of immediately, and that's what that list is. But we do have our 20-year evaluation of the plant, and at that point, that's going to be an opportunity to take care of a lot of things. For example, the air handling system in one particular area is going to cost, the estimate is $210,000. And legally, we can't have people in there with the air quality the way it is. But we don't have $210,000 falling out of our pocket at this moment. And that's kind of the thing all the way through, is it's illegal to have it this way, but can we get through until the 20-year and get it fixed during the 20-year? And that's kind of the juggling act we're doing. Oh, and also to Angela's point, everything she said is absolutely correct.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all saw that too.
And I have, like I said, I'm not putting it off. We're trying to figure it out, but I didn't even know where to start to look, and the trade show is what people say is the best, there'll be people there and make the feelers and have them come and get we'll have an estimate, we'll put out some bids and we'll get it going. I mean, I'm not trying to not do it. I made, the haulers don't seem to care what you charge them, but when you tell them you're gonna meter it, and what I found out is we're one of the only towns that don't meter it. It gets their eyes popping.
Heidi?
And again, I've been on this since January, coming to almost every meeting because of rates. And I do want to thank the business community here tonight because we're discussing them. And I will have to say what Stephen came forward in March of what was taking place, what that department has done in such a quick time is absolutely amazing. And a real round of applause for the water and sewer department. Alan, Brad, Stephen, they have gone above and beyond of any department right now and the condition it was in. And we are just getting him through the department, and we are all moving forward from what it was and moving everything forward. We know that there's issues. It's like, okay, and just being on a timeline and making sure they're getting the tools they need. And that's what's going to happen. Okay, so you guys have done a great
The
job.
plant was in dire straits
I went
from
over.
January until March. We are just, right now, it's glued back together and it'll operate and we can keep it operating. I mean, January and February, every time I went home, I did not know if we would have any operable influent pump. Because the good one had blown up in January, early January, and we were operating with one that was already leaking and condemned 5 years ago.
And past its service life.
Mhm.
Yeah, put in 1972.
Heidi, I want to thank you for what you said. And
Yeah.
I want to say I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
I just want to add two comments. First of all, I think it's no secret that the staff that was working and continues to work at the department had other employment opportunities,
Absolutely.
and staff are in demand. And I think it's commendable that Steve and the staff brought this to our attention, which admittedly is not an easy conversation to begin. But felt comfortable doing that. And I'm very satisfied that they felt comfortable enough to bring this to our attention and are willing to stick with us to work through it. The other point I wanted to make is, as a commission member, I feel badly that this got that far. I prided myself in regularly just popping in at the plant to see how things were going. I'm not going to dwell on the past and point fingers, but I will say that in my visits there, the information that I was given and the things that I were told were clearly not true. For that, I feel badly. I don't want to make excuses, but I want to say that, we are civilian people trying to do something for the community. We're not engineers. And when somebody says this is this and that is that, okay. Lesson learned. Now I ask more questions and, I'm more aware and less naive. I feel badly that we are where we are, but I'm confident that we can learn from this and move forward. Denise?
Two quick questions. The 20-year inspection study, when is that date?
It's,
So it's
it's already underway,
Yeah,
right?
they've begun to start to look into some things. They're going to schedule a site visit in May. So really, it's about, what is it, around $150,000 engineering study that kind of goes through the whole plant, tip to tail, as well as the collection system, all the manholes and everything as well. I think it wraps up in the fall, early winter timeframe, and then from that, they come out with a full comprehensive report on every piece of machinery, evaluations of lifespan and replacement.
And then the second part, going back to what Angela said, which was pretty eye-opening, is there a way that we can temporarily, with the haulers, say you can dump between 9 and 11 and have someone there to check and see what they dumped?
Most of the time, there is somebody there. It just happened that the day that Angela was there, we were at a meeting with Josh.
Gotcha.
Uh,
So you do check and verify
Yeah,
that
we
they
do.
have
I
dumped that
mean,
much?
and we have, that we know how much the tanks hold.
Theoretically,
Theoretically, because there is a whole bunch of grit filling the tanks. But for the most part, we know how much the haulers are bringing in.
And
But it is totally an honor system here in
Yeah.
Richmond.
so I'm wondering if there's a way we can lock, I mean, I'm not talking about gates.
Yeah,
There is a gate
Before
there.
you
I'm-
start work,
no, the gates are locked. They're locked right now.
so they can't get in.
They
until
can't get in
someone-
after hours. I mean, that's the difference here in Richmond. They're only allowed 7 to 3. 7 to 4 if Alan is around later. And that's their time frame. Other towns do allow 24-hour dumping. But most of those towns have meters with, basically, they have each driver hauler gets like a credit card.
Yep.
They put it in and they unload and it gives them a printout. Yeah. And that's what we would like to go to. And that's, like I said, when we talked about raising the rates, which we did it May 1st, that didn't seem to phase anybody.
Right.
But when
Just
you
tell
tell them you're going to a meter, that seems to get attention.
Job, Jay?
third time's a charm. Denise, one other thing, the obvious question to people listening who have not been in the loop is if this 20-year study, as they're evaluating the plan, says, oh, sweet Jesus, we need to replace this now. That's an option. If we find something that needs to be replaced yesterday, we are not going to wait until we've got the full study to replace it. And another question, the other thing about septage, The question that everybody asks is, how much profit are we making off septage? And the answer is, we don't know, because we're having a hard time teasing out from everything else exactly how much it costs us to process that. But that's something we're trying very hard to work on.
Aaron?
I know we have a lot of fun ahead of us. So when you go to your thing on the 11th.
Yeah.
Is it feasible that when we meet on the 16th, we might have
I should have
some
information.
information on
Yep.
that day? Because I think that is
No,
very important.
I
for
mean,
now.
it's one of the
A week away.
four reasons that I'm going down.
Okay, so when we meet on the 16th, we can talk about what.
Yep.
You've discovered
I
and
should-
then.
I should be able to have some
Forward.
prices. And we can decide which way we want to go.
Mhm.
And get some, if we have to put it down to a bid, we'll do that, but I should at least have prices, idea of what kind of systems we're talking about, and time frame on how long it would take us to get them.
Because I agree that like we need to get that done sooner than
No, I
later.
mean,
but
and
let's
I'm
put
like
it
I said,
in
I haven't,
a year.
it's
let's do it.
not been on the back burner. I asked Phil last Friday when I talked with him.
Perfect.
But yeah,
One more question, Steve. The meters that need calibration, are those pieces of equipment, things that were installed recently enough where if we have to ask somebody who's unfamiliar with it to work on it, it's
No,
new,
they're-
recent enough, or would it all?
meters that have been in place, they're flow meters that have been in place. But Tom is not the original person who installed them. He was brought online, and I'm not sure, Alan might know, when Bart was, when Tom Allen was brought online.
It was like, I believe, 2 years ago. He used to calibrate the meters for the water house and the effluent flow meter, which the state requires once a year.
Okay,
So he's been with us, Tom Allen's been it's LCS controls. He's been with us for, a couple of years, knows the system, but it goes again to, we need somebody to come in and we don't, I hate to, but I have called repeatedly for over a month and not been able to physically talk to Tom. I've gotten several other people there who say Tom is very busy and he will return your call, but I still haven't gotten them. Okay, so we're beginning to put some feelers out. There are other people who do this work. There are other companies that can come in and do it. I don't think we have to be held just to Tom, but
okay,
like I said, he does know the system, and I hate to bring somebody else in who, it might cost more to catch up to speed.
yeah,
But if we can't get him, we can't get him, and we need to address these issues.
okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the list? Okay. Are we ready to jump into the budget?
Real quick, if anybody is needing fortification before the budget, we do have snacks back there.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Josh, you want to start the budget discussion?
Sure, let me get a sheet to share. Okay. All right, so I'm going to share this sheet and kind of walk through this a bit. The budget as presented in the packet remains basically unchanged from what does remain unchanged.
Josh,
Yeah.
I mind zooming in a little bit? 'Cause
Yeah, I
everybody
can,
else in the audience
yeah,
can
I
see all the
do-
numbers.
right, let's see what we can do.
Maybe move the people.
Yeah, try to get all my various computer screens working well here. So the budget in the packet remains unchanged from the last time that we looked at this 2 weeks ago. I think and that includes projections on wages, benefits, items that we know or anticipate to be increasing in cost, from the disposal with CSWD to the cost of chemicals that we've looked at. I think the real challenge with this budget is goes back to that list that we just looked at. What are we going to replace this year? What are we going to replace next fiscal year? And how much is that going to cost? As you'll see, as we get into this, there are some things that we have some decent numbers on, and there's other things that we just don't really know the full cost of it right now. So wanted to preface that we're going to get to that here in a minute. I want to walk through this sheet a little bit. This is a look at what our projections are for those unassigned funds at the end of fiscal year 23. And I'll review quickly. The unassigned funds are essentially money that we would have as excess at the end of the fiscal year, combining of all previous fiscal years. That's not allocated towards a reserve account, and that's probably not the best term for it because it's not a reserve in the traditional sense. So it would be in a general fund budget, but it is still earmarked by the commission for a future project in water or wastewater. So when we talk about unassigned funds, we're looking at that money that is in water or wastewater, and they're separate, that we could use basically for anything in water or anything in wastewater. So what we did was, and I won't go line by line, but we looked at the revenue. What do we project for the year-end projections, and what do we think our variance is going to be on revenue over where we were in the previous year, or over what our projection is. So the big one here is the Bridge Street loan reimbursement. We actually finished negative in unassigned funds because we hadn't yet received this at the end of fiscal year 22, but we received that $308,000 now. So going forward into 23, that is added in now to our expense, our revenue. As we go through each individual, and this is where zooming in gets a little challenging, so I'll try to split the difference here as best we can. We can always zoom in if there's something specific. So we look at salaries, administrative expenses, operational expenses. Using our best projections, we come up with a total of $225,145 that will be in addition to what we budgeted for in revenue or underspent in expenses. As I mentioned, now we'll zoom in a little bit here more. The balance at the end of FY 22 was negative. There's our negative 64,000, but we added in that 300,000 we got for reimbursement. So that leaves us with projected unassigned funds in FY 23 of $191,000. The recommendation from the auditors, we've discussed it here before, is that we keep 15% of the budget on hand in case there's any sort of emergency or unforeseen expense that might come up. So the current budget for water is $409,000. 15% of that is $61,000, which leaves us with $129,000 in water as our projection in funds in excess of the 15%. We did the same.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Before you tell me.
Yeah.
What is the excess?
Oh, sorry. So that's looking at the full 191 that we have, subtracting out the $61,000 that we were talking about keeping essentially on here that we don't want to go below. So that's the 129 that's above that.
Before you move on, just
Yeah.
so we're going to talk water for just 1 second.
Sure. Let me actually share the Excel sheet. It might be easier to zoom around on. So I'll listen to your question and I will get back to the sheet.
That calculation was 61,000 is 15% of your budget. That calculation of 15% of your budget should also include your reserves. Because it's about having enough money for cash flow. And so they say 15% of unassigned is to help you with your cash flow. Well, if you have 260,000 in reserves, that's over 15%.
Right.
Okay, so if the unassigned is to help with cash flow, or is the unassigned to help with the fact that you might overspend by 15%? Because you have that reserves for a purpose. And that reserves could be if you need it for that extra 15% because you're overspending, or you need it because of cash flow. So taking the $191,000 of excess revenue that you have or excess savings, you don't need to then say, well, 61,000 we have to set aside for unassigned, when you're going to show us in another slide that you have 260,000 in reserves.
So
that's your savings.
so when the select board looks at this from the general fund point of view, they would not include money that's in a reserve account because that's set aside for a specific cost in the future. It could, let me finish. It could be the board, the commission could decide that they want to include that in and say, yes, we'll put it as part of 15%, which is a fair conversation to do. Yes, it's not statutorily committed like it is in the general fund, but the commission and previous commissions have looked at that to say, okay, we want this money in here to pay for future items in these categories. So the risk in doing that is if you include that in 15% and for some reason costs won't run over or revenue falls short, then you are cutting into the real balance of those reserves, which maybe is a calculated risk that is worth taking, but it's just something that needs to be discussed and calculated. Jay.
Right, and this one water commissioner says, don't include those for the exact reasons you said. That's not liquid money that you can just use for anything.
Technically, what they said at the last meeting, it was, and that's the only reason I'm bringing it up, is when they said it is not restricted. It is just what we're labeling the account by statute. It's not a restricted fund.
But we're choosing to treat it as such.
And it's actually technically a savings account. It's what they called it last time.
Mhm.
And so as a savings account, if you never touch your savings account, you're only saving it for the future, then you're still overcharging your current users and banking money that's unnecessary. Because I think what you're going to find is some of your revenues numbers are going to go up for your septage once you start metering it by a minimum of 20%. So all I'm saying is watch how much you keep putting in your savings account for a future situation where you just found that you're the highest rate in the state of Vermont and your previous superintendent wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing with any of the money because the plant is run down so bad and you just spent 30 to 40 minutes on that. So I'm not saying you aren't going to need some of your reserves in the future, but I think you really need to look at these quote unassigned funds and saying we have to set aside unassigned funds too. So on top of your savings, you're gonna have 15%. So do your calculation on what your savings plus your 15% is truly at.
Denise?
Does the state in Vermont statutes annotated or anywhere else have recommendations of the max that you can have in a reserve fund regarding water sewer?
I have not seen a max. Connie's got her hand up. I'm not sure if she's speaking to that or.
Connie,
Give
go
me the
ahead.
recommendation.
There is no max because technically you don't have reserves in a proprietary. Years ago, the board wanted us to make sure that we had these funds to set aside. So we do budget to add to them, but in adding to them, it's also the money that we are using every time there's a water line break. So say we budget, unlike the general where we may budget 100,000 to go to a certain reserve, say we budget 100,000 in water, we're going to be using that reserve for actual expenses that happen during the year. If there's some left, then great. It goes into that fund balance that we're calling a reserve. If we go beyond that, then that has to come out of unassigned funds if we want to bring that back to a positive balance, which is what happened last year. We had one that ended up in the red. So although there's not specific uses like we do with the general fund where we know we're buying dump truck number 2 in this much money with a trade-in. The use is more general. The capital, the one we call capital reserve is going to be items over $5,000 that we need to buy. It's going to be on that wastewater side. It is going to be those big items you need right now. That's what was being planned for. The shorter term things are what's going on right now, what's breaking right now that we're going to need to spend that money on that is not included in our daily operational budget. And that was all done in an attempt to keep rates down so that that money is there.
Thank you, Connie. Aaron?
I'm very new to this, but when I looked at this and knowing what we had in the reserve, I like that you're trying to be within that recommended 15% of the budget, that 61,000. Looking at the list of what needs to happen, the money that we currently have, it feels like we could allocate some of that to offset the rates, but we have a lot coming down the pike that we're going to need to pay for. And I think we need to focus on how much of that we can use, but knowing that that air system thing is over $220,000, like the ammonia situation, like there's a lot of things that I feel like we are going to need to spend that fund because it was not spent in the past for whatever reason.
I think a lot of these questions will be answered as Josh continues with the explanation, but we'll just get the hands that are in the air a chance to speak now. Angela, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the overage from last fiscal year that showed up as a negative amount is just slightly over the 15% that the auditors recommend you have in reserve. I'm just trying to make you the comparison between real numbers, end of fiscal year 22, and here we are, end of fiscal year 23. Your amount is over 3 times the amount of what the auditors want you to have in reserves. That's all I want to say. I completely agree with what Aaron just said. There are some costs coming down the pipeline, no pun intended. And you do need to have monies as you start to get a handle on the quotes that are going to be coming in. But I do also agree with what's the comments from your audience that the amount of unassigned funds is too high. It just needs to be looked at and balanced more equitably. That's all.
Thank you. Morgan?
I'll wait until Josh.
Okay. Josh?
So then we ran the same projection for sewer, as we did for water. At the end, we looked at a, unassigned fund balance of, and let me try to zoom in here a little bit more. I know that I don't always doing that. So we have the fiscal year 22 year end audit 382. We're looking at a growth of about 159. Projected unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal year 23 of $541,000. The budget is $967,000. At 15% is $145. The funds we have in excess is $396,000 projected at the end of fiscal year 23 in sewer. Now we'll go to the, so this is a look back at the history of unassigned funds. So we looked at the history between 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Did not provide the history going forward or the projections. We sort of talked about that in the previous pages. But what I wanted to look at going forward mostly was looking at where do our reserve accounts sort of end up at the end of fiscal year 23. And let me just hide a couple of these columns here just to make it a little easier. Can I hide those easily? Apparently not super easily. So we've got the short-term capital reserve and water resources. Traditionally, that's been used for machinery and parts in water that have less than, I think it's a 10-year life cycle. So we're able to have some money there to replace those machines fairly quickly as they might wear out. Water capital is for larger projects. We've used some of that and this distribution capital. For instance, we had a West Main Street water line replacement a few years ago, and the commission at that time decided to use most of the funds in the distribution capital reserve, which is why it's down to 21,000 now to go towards that project. So that's again a decision by the commission. Do you want to use reserve funds on hand or loan or a combination of both? That wasn't a DWSRF loan, so we weren't getting favorable zero interest on those. Similar conversation in wastewater. So you've got your wastewater capital of 156. And that's also your short-term capital for similarly lived items in wastewater of 158. And then the collection system is at 468,000. And my understanding on this is we've done a lot of work since I've been here in the last 5 years on the water line system. So we've used some reserves. We've used a lot of DWSRF money to replace water lines. As we saw earlier, we should be starting to replace some sewer lines. So we do have some money put aside for that. Of course, the other side of this coin is always if we don't have as many reserves, there might be other loans out there that we can take advantage of to use for these projects. And with the CWSRF loan program out there, if there's a qualifying project, a lot of times look at that at zero interest for some forgiveness. So little give and take on either one of those. Then where it gets, I think, a little interesting is I'm going to skip over to this section here. Well, So this essentially is the list that we looked at earlier that is in the Word document form. We tried to put this into a format of, well, what is it going to cost and what fiscal year is it going to come in? And as we talked about in the last part of the meeting, you'll see we have the outside contractor notes where it's Tom Allen and Bill Laramie and Dan Pratt. And we're starting to get closer on some of those numbers, but some of those just sort of unknown. So we tried to start to say, well, what do we know about what some of these estimates are? So you can look at things like the water tank mixer replacement. We've gotten some quotes already. It's going to be around $20,000 probably in the next fiscal year. Water tank cleaning, probably about $9,000, also probably in the next fiscal year. We've got clean repair of aeration tanks. We updated that with numbers that we got last week that Steve spoke to earlier. So we tried to go through and say, well, what do we know? So what can we do to project in the future? Then looking at draft funding, try to do a little bit of an exercise. And this is really like my take at it, my notes, but it's a starting point. We can move on from here if you like. To say, well, if we use our water capital reserve for the water tank mixer, and we use water capital reserve for water tank cleaning, and then we use unassigned funds maybe for the excavation to locate the Borden Street water valve, which we know is coming up as well. I won't go through it all in detail, but if I sort of tried to put some things into some buckets to see, well, how much would we still need to use in unassigned funds? So the estimated total usage of unassigned funds in this exercise that I ran was $135,000. Total use of unassigned funds that could be paid or reimbursed, so not including the waterline service inventory. So these are things that are like the one that we just voted on, or the commissioners voted on for the service line inventory that would be paid out, and then we'll get the money back on that. So it really, in a way I ran these numbers is it comes out to about $135,000 plus the $43,000, which we have to pay and come back, which is about $196,000. And that is, a bit more than we would currently have on hand for water for unassigned funds. I did the same thing in wastewater. Again, we can change where money comes out of. But as I looked at that, it looked like we were going to have to use about $39,000 in unassigned funds. We still have estimated total usage of unassigned funds that would be paid back with $154,000. So on the wastewater side, it looks like we would actually have about $211,000 in unassigned funds that we could put back into offsetting the rates. And again, we can change those buckets a little bit, however anybody wants to, but I kind of wanted to get a starting point because this to me seems to be the most challenging part of our budget going forward.
Thank you.
You really answered my question, which is, it seems like it's a little bit of juggling balls here. How much money do we borrow? And how much of that money we borrow is forgiven? It seems some loans are. So I guess without knowing that, it's a little bit of a challenge to figure out how much of over 15% to apply to rates. You feel like you can get to a point where, that's a little bit more understandable or manageable, or?
I mean, based on what I was able to look at last week with this, looking at these numbers this way, unless we wanted to dip into the water reserves, I'm not sure there's much room on the water side, whereas it looks like I think there's about $200,000 that we could put in on the wastewater side, and still be able to pay for the items that are coming up and still be able to have the cash outlay for like a 20-year study and know that we're going to get paid back on that for this year.
I'm just worried that these estimates are going to be low.
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive to the desire to keep rates low or to make rates low. I just get very skittish when you do a one-time hand back in the form of let's reduce rates, then we have to turn and take a loan because we didn't keep enough back. I think it's going to wind up when all is said and done, we're going to be putting a lot of money into the plant, not just stuff we know about now, but stuff we don't know about now.
Brian? Sorry. Oh, Kara?
We all feel that
I
way.
just want to make sure I'm clearly understood. I'm not asking you to give back the money to the water and sewer users. I'm asking you to fix the problems that you have and definitely spend that money and stop saving money and not fixing problems. So I want to make sure that's very clear. The next,
That's clear.
well, I when you think I'm not thinking you should have 15%, that's not my point. Is just saving money to save money is not a good plan.
Sure.
fix the problems. This issue with the water and sewer users and their rates, where I think you're missing the ball with that, is your projected revenues of both actually installing the meters for the water users. So I think you're going to increase your usage when you have accurate meter readings on both your residential, your commercial, and your government. So you need to increase a percentage there. And I think that Stephen gave a range last time, and I think the minimum started at 10% and went up to as high as 25% when they actually got the smart meters. So I think once you start increasing your usage, it's going to drop your rates, so that they don't pay at the highest rate to start with, and then you put the meters in, and then everybody's paying at the higher rate that they don't have to, and you're banking more money. The other piece was the meter for the septage. Is if you calculate a minimum of a 20% increase on all of your septage, that's going to reduce their rates. So all I'm saying is on the two revenue sides of things, you need to increase those two revenues numbers, and then you need to use some of the unassigned and some of the reserves to fix the problems that you know you have. That's my point. And that will reduce rates.
Denise?
Just some history. When was the last time that the hauler's rate was increased?
Today.
Just today.
Today,
I mean, like before today.
Oh, like 6 months ago.
December
December.
was the first meeting I was at.
Okay,
We
so
increased
we
them.
increased people dumping their stuff over here. in
And then we
December.
realized we could go higher, that we've been conservative before.
Yes, and then we did it again
Effective today.
effective today.
And
So we increased it, but it became effective today.
right,
But is it something we do annually?
No,
No.
we increased it in December and then we increased it again, right?
Yes.
So we've increased it twice in the past 6 months.
and the sense I have from previous discussions is that we are completely open to raising it again and
Yes.
again. That, you know, one of the things we really want to do, like I said earlier, is get an accurate idea of how much it costs to process.
Yeah.
And once we have that, that's a game changer.
And this commission has asked for those figures for years,
Yeah.
but we haven't gotten them.
And one thing, Denise, that I didn't know when I started was we need the septage to balance out what we're doing in the plant. So we do need to take some amount of volume. I didn't know if you knew that, but I didn't know that
had
when I
heard that.
started.
Didn't know if that was good.
Yeah, so we can't get away from taking septage. We have to take a certain amount.
Denise?
And I don't remember, I didn't see what line it was, but on the salaries. What was the overall salary saving for the senior employee that's no longer with us?
For overall or water slash?
Just
sewer?
from the departure to the new budget.
So that's a good question. I don't know exactly how much we're saving on that one person's salary because, well, I haven't calculated specifically on what we're saving on his, but we've also had 2 employees that got significant raises since then. So that went away. We added that. And then we're also adding on Simon Services for at least the interim of about $3,000 a month to help
You
cover
mean SOS?
SOS, yeah, with the 8 projects.
I
So-
think that's a great one.
So yeah, what we tried to do was look at what was our most recent payroll, what do we expect for the next 3 months going forward on that payroll? Where are we going to come out with at the end? And then also add in the Simon Services
So
operations.
it's really just the actual hourly pay, because those 2 other employees were already getting all the benefits, medical, dental,
Yeah, it's the
vision, and
hourly.
retirement. So it's just the actual hourly.
Yeah, so their hourly wage went up and then associated like VEMR's and Social Security went up and overtime has gone up a bit as well because they've been doing more work on overtime. So yeah, we try to look at all those and give our best projection.
Sure.
So Josh, I know you've got so much on your plate. This is just one little tiny piece of it. Do we have somebody, or do you as a board hire somebody who specializes in writing the grants and all the specialized water sewer reimbursements that are available to municipalities? Do you have a contract with someone to take care of all those grants for us?
Take care of all the grants that are available.
Yes.
So I know I don't know that we get every single grant that's available, but the ones that we do have, we're looking at grants for like mostly larger replacement items. So the water and sewer line replacements, things like that. And then we manage those in-house. We're able to manage that through our finance. But as far as outreach and trying to see what else is out there,
But didn't we?
we don't have somebody specifically doing that.
A young woman, and she wrote all those grants for us because she worked at the state and knew of those grants availability.
Perhaps before my, I know that, for the ones that we do get, we usually work with the engineers and they help write those grants because they know exactly what we need for those.
Because we know what we need to do. And then we seek funding for that. And we, read the tea leaves and see what financing is advantageous for us to pursue. So we sort of go about the process the other way. Instead of what can we get good financing for to do what? We know what we need to have done, so we pursue how best to proceed with attractive financing. Questions?
Can I
Go ahead.
talk a little bit?
Yes.
The one thing that I think a lot of people haven't been thinking of is that once you get your numbers for your 20 years study come in there, there's going to be with that, you should probably budget more for the stuff like the cleaning. That should be budgeted in the budget when they do that, but also the spare parts that in the 10-year items in there might be more than what you're spending now. So I have a suspicion it's going to be way more than you currently have. So you're probably going to have a bigger budget requirement and once they actually put the plan in with all the requirements, especially if you put an advanced air system in, it's going to require much more maintenance than what you're doing now, probably a contract and all that for every building. So your budgets are going to be way more now when that new building goes in than what you're paying on it.
So you're saying our operational maintenance budgeting has been historically too low?
Yes, Kendall kept it low. You're probably going to pay way more on that.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Yep.
I mean, going forward, we'd like to see, once we get the plant clean, a budget item of some amount to clean one tank a year. And that way we can inspect it and clean it. And, next year we do another one. That way we keep it budgeted out where it's not such a humongous cost.
I just want to go on record as saying this, and again, I don't want to look back and point fingers, but Bart Hill and I asked this question for years, and we were told that our asset management program kept track of what our projected maintenance expenses would be, and we were budgeting accordingly.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that.
Oh, I know.
Spare parts are still not on the shelf.
I know.
We had a blower go down the other day, go downstairs to get parts, the belts for it, the belts broke. Go downstairs to get belts. There's one, it takes 3.
Yeah.
Long story short, it turns out that if you don't do any maintenance for years
You say,
and you start doing maintenance, your costs go up a lot.
Yes.
And there was a lot of things at the plant where the answer, and Steve can testify to this, shouldn't we maintain that? Too expensive. Shouldn't we maintain that? Too expensive. So we just didn't.
Now it's too expensive.
Well, we put in our budget, we were doing it and didn't do it.
well, yeah.
So back to this budget.
Angela, go ahead.
I would just like to point out, Alan is not incorrect. Alan is right that what is happening with their obligations as operators is going to shift as more systems get put in place, especially that air blower for the ammonia problem in that back building. However, I want to point out, when you start automating more of the systems, it's going to relieve some of their workload for them to switch to doing some of this other stuff. So I don't necessarily agree with everything Alan was saying, that it's going to be more hours for them. I believe that their jobs will start to shift as you automate more of these procedures. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I speak again?
Go ahead.
The trouble I find with the more automation you add means the more stuff that can break. And with electronics, it's like a modern laptop. How many people get a laptop? It works great. It's like your car, same thing. How many modern devices break down quickly? The more of these things you automate, the more stuff it breaks and the more specialized people you need to fix it. That's the problem you run into. You need the guys like Tom Allen to fix it. because we can't fix that stuff. That's the problem you run into with this stuff, the more you add to it.
Yeah, and that's where I think, like, I think it was Angela who was just speaking that, yeah, the job will change, the maintenance will change, the type of things we do are changing, and the service providers that we call for those fixes will change. It'll be a shift as we upgrade the technology.
But as far as maintaining things, having a good schedule of maintenance, a checklist, that's something we haven't had in decades.
But we were told we did.
But we were told we did. So in terms of, like, I don't know if other people do this, but every year, every time that we change the clocks, we go around the house and we change the batteries in the fire. That's just what you do. And we haven't been doing that. So in terms of, as systems grow more complex, they can break in more ways. Well, that is true if you don't do any maintenance, if you don't know how they work, and if you don't keep the manual, because how many times do you call somebody and say it won't work, and they say, did you check the manual? And it's like, manual? Oh, I threw that out the first day. Things don't have to become more complicated, provided you use common sense. And documentation, process documentation is really important, it turns out.
Nate, I'm going to call on you, and then I'm going to steer us back to the budget. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to bring up, your asset management plans aren't meant to be written and then looked at occasionally. They're a living, working document and should be treated as such, and at least reviewed and updated, at least not at a minimum, probably annually and more often than that, depending on the process you have. So I would just recommend, I mean, it sounds like you have an asset management plan. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure I will. I've looked at this list that you have for your items, and I've gone through your budget. And it seems to me that if you stick with if you update your management plans, I think you'll have a much better outcome with your budgeting expenses going forward. That's all.
I agree. And thank you, Steve.
Well, when I was told we had an asset management plan, but I was told we didn't have the ability and software to access it.
Sure, we can solve
There was
that.
always an excuse, long story
No,
short.
I mean, it's one of the first things I did when I got hired. Where's your asset plan? Where's your maintenance records? What do I gotta start on first? And when I started digging in, 97, 98, 2001.
Heidi?
And we are going to be moving forward.
Yes.
Yes.
And we are going to have that plant a well-oiled machine, just like the rest of the other departments, who also went through this. So we are moving forward on this. Let's get back to the budget, please.
Thank you, Heidi. So we have some preliminary estimates on what costs will be, what projected revenues are. Is this a fair time to start talking about rates?
Yes.
Let's start talking about rates.
So I will,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Josh is
Oh.
first.
I know if you got something before rates.
I have a question about the rates, so when you're done.
So Jay asked me last week to try to simplify the
And then
presentation.
Erin and I went through that exact same thing today, so I know what she's gonna be asking. And
Okay.
if she's asking, yeah, the public is asking.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a chance to put together a nicer presentation, but I think I can speak to the process a little less confusingly than last time. So this is our rate setting spreadsheet, which I know Jay is going, oh my God, yes, it's way too big. But let me try to speak to where we're looking at with how we at least determine the rate. So I'll start here on the percentage, and this is our core user. So this is residential, commercial and government, and the school. So these are the ones that we bill out every quarter, and there's other things that we account for revenue, like septic receipts or sale of water, that we factor out of what we need to raise by the core users. And the way that we figure out for this rate structure, how much each individual category needs to raise is, well, what percentage did they use of water and of wastewater? And this looks at the last 12 months of usage from April 1st of 2022 through the end of March of 2023 to give us a percentage of how much water, how much wastewater are each one of those using. The one part where it gets funky, and I'll try to explain this better, is the school, it does not pay property taxes. In everybody's property tax is an assessment for fire protection. So everybody in town, whether they're on the system or not, pays into that. And that's essentially water usage by the fire department, whether it's for training or actually putting out a fire. So we assess a 5% increase. We basically increase the rate of the school in water. So that goes from 5.13 there to 10.13 to make up for the fact and charge them a little bit more for the fact that they don't pay that fire protection fee. Then,
Just to quickly add to
yes.
what Josh said there, so when the new water tank was put in, it was strongly suggested that we upsize the tank for fire protection. So Bart Hill and I said, whoa, wait, why are 400 users subsidizing fire protection for 4,000 residents of Richmond? So this was formulated to offset the portion of the upsizing of the tank that was strictly for additional fire protection. So the town as a whole bears that cost, not the water sewer users. So that's where this figure came from.
Mhm.
And then what we do is we reduce by the same percentage, residential and commercial. So residential gets reduced by 2.98% based on their usage, commercial by 2.02%. So their percentage of what they owe comes down, the school goes up. So essentially what we're left with is, okay, revenue that needs to be raised by the core users in water is $321,000. Based on the percentage, residential pays their percentage, which is at, I'm gonna make sure I get my number right, at 53.56%. So we literally take that number times that percent, comes what they have to pay in water. I'm not going to go through each individual one, but that's the process to get all of these 6 numbers essentially of what each category has to pay for what their share is for water and sewer. Then we'll just continue with the residential water of the 172,066. So then we get into, well, what is that going to break down between fixed rate and metered rate? So these ratios have been set for a number of years. I think this was set at the last time the rate study happened, maybe it was in 16 or 17, I forget the exact date. But it's for residential, 30% of the bill is fixed and 70% of the money raised is metered. So in order to figure out, well, how much we need to raise $51,000 in revenue, because that's what our 30% of the 172 is, we calculate that rate, that if usage remains roughly the same, a rate of 122.61 per account will get us to the 51,620, and a rate of $12.65 per 1,000 gallons will get us to 120, which then gets us to the 172, which is the percentage of the water budget that residential used in the past and the percentage that they would pay going forward. So that's the methodology behind it. It's really, to my way of thinking, pretty straightforward that each class pays for what they use. So I wanted to at least start there. Hopefully there's a more simple explanation than what I provided last time.
Right. But the question that Aaron and I were talking about today is, just because we've agreed that, for example, for residential, the fixed rate will be 30%, that was not on a tablet handed to Moses on top of Mount Sinai. That's the number we can change.
That, I think so, because that was the number that was set the last time we broke into rates. So I believe you could change that right now if you wanted to.
Right. And for commercial, I mean, Heidi, we heard you. We don't want to drive business out of town by charging a whopping fixed rate if we can avoid it. And so we've heard at a number of meetings, can we lower that fixed rate and get more from the actual usage, from the metered usage? And so I don't know what the sweet spot is on that number, but we've heard from a lot of people that's something we should at least look at.
And another thing to Kara's point, I want to circle back on this since we've sort of covered a little ground here. Typically what we do, and I didn't cover this just to try to simplify it, is we look at 98% of the water used from the previous year, and we set the rates based on that, assuming or accounting for some people who might conserve. We don't want to undercharge if people conserve and then we're not charging enough.
Right.
What we could do with this is either not factor that in this year, figuring that we'll have higher septage rates potentially and maybe better water meters, so we're measuring more water, or we'll go in the opposite direction to 105% and assume that there's, we'll get those new water meters in at least partway through the year. We'll have an increased measurement of water. We won't have that exact number. We don't know exactly when the meters are going to go in. But that's another way to kind of reduce a bit about what each one would pay.
Heidi?
I also wanted to point out to the commission, because I did go back from 2017, because I know we've done the school bills
Mhm.
and looked at the previous year. And my thought was, we were all discussing like COVID and what that looked like before COVID, after COVID. So I did go back to 2017. And what I have found is they're actually paying less now in 2022 last quarter than they were in 2017. So this is Camel's Hump. And then behind it is the 2023 bill for the quarter. And then I also have Richmond Elementary.
You're so good to us.
Wow.
Yes, so I wanted to point that out to the commission. That's Camel's Hump. And then this is Richmond Elementary. Now, remember, these schools have merged.
Right.
So this is Huntington, Bolton, Richmond, Jericho, and Underhill. This is the elementary school and the same exact findings. So I think that my personal opinion is that is something that needs to be addressed, is the school rates.
Okay,
Eric, you want to see this? No? I don't want to. So I used this in quarter, so it wasn't during like a summer, it was exact same quarter,
Yeah, apples to
so
apples.
they apples to apples.
So a few different talking points here where we can adjust fixed cost, meter cost.
Are you looking at 58, line 58?
If you're talking about these, you're looking at here,
Yes.
right?
And also
Yes.
our projected income going on the information we talked about tonight. Thoughts, comments?
Well, the third thing that Heidi just brought up was changing the quantity of usage
Right,
to reallocate
the
between.
percentages, right,
That was not something Josh just highlighted.
right.
Well, so then I think that would go back up to,
Back
up to here to say, okay, rather than saying the school used 5.13 plus 5% for fire protection, there would be some increase of that 10% to
Right.
whatever base, but I'm not sure what that's based on. I mean, it's interesting to see between 17 and 22. And I don't know how we set the rates for the FY18. I wasn't involved in that one, but since I've been here, it's really been about percentage of use. So I would just want to know, what justification do we use if we're going to say, okay, the school now goes from 10% to 15% or whatever
Because their
percent.
usage changed.
But their usage in the past year was 5% of the overall water usage.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So that's what we're basing it on, is the most recent last 12 months data compared to the other users. So, and I maybe there's a way to justify it, I don't know, but that would be my first question, is we're trying to make this equitable based on the last 12 months.
How come when you go down to the like rates for core users, how come in the column that says the percentage difference, the school is at the 0.5 and then the commercial and the residential are at the 2.6? And in the same column under the sewer, everybody's the same. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know, but if that was the same, would it,
Yeah,
or why isn't it? Why is it the same for commercial and residential? I just don't understand that part.
yeah, again, I think, I mean, because when you look at this, you look at the dollar, the percentage difference, it's really saying, okay, the change between 23 and 24, based on the methodology we used in 23, which is the same methodology in 24, the rate is going up by 32 cents. which is an increase of 2.6%. So I don't really tie these numbers in a column together.
Okay.
It's more, well, how does that individual line change and what does that do for the users?
Changes.
And so yeah, that's how I calculate, how I'm calculating that. Does that answer the question? I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
so I'm not trying to say everybody has a 2.5% increase.
So it's
I'm just trying to,
coincidental that it came out.
it's coincidental. In some cases, it came out the same. It's more about what, by using that methodology, what does that do to the dollar increases?
What would happen if we raised theirs to like 1% difference? Adjusted the number on the rate so that they were at 1% difference, how much revenue would that change
So that this went up from 2.6 to 1%?
on the school one? The metered rate. for the
Oh, so if that went from 0.5 to,
To what?
yeah,
Right.
I have to sort of back into that number a little bit because I can't, like, I'd have to change something, you know what I
That's not a
mean? I'd have to
manual entry
change
then.
how much money
Right.
to then kind of like figure out where that's gonna go. Because it's not like I change, that percentage doesn't drive the dollars raised, drives the percentage.
Right.
Okay.
If you see what I mean. it's
Right,
sort of
that's
how
not a
this-
manual entry cell, that's the result of the
Yeah.
formula, so
Or-
you'd have to.
Yeah, so I'd have to figure out how much more revenue do we need to raise from the school to make that a 1% increase?
Yeah.
And I really include the percentage difference just as a, because I think it's interesting to look at, like you're doing, to say, well, why is this one higher than the other one, or is that equitable? And maybe we can make some other changes, but we'd have to kind of go
Yeah,
backwards to make the
back it out.
changes. Where I think what we could do is say, well, let's say we did just the right cell to change. If we see, oh God, is that going to change everything? Editing on the fly is challenging, but if this went up to say like 12%, then everything else would have to go down a little bit. It would get a little complicated to change that, but that would be the way to do it. Is if we want to have the school pay more, how do we adjust for that?
Denise?
So I know if you break down the number of water sewer, Richmond is one of the highest, if not the highest in the state of Vermont. Is there a way you could break it down even further to look at school versus school? I mean, even schools in Chittenden County, what their rate is. Is there
Certainly be
something
worth
that
a
we could
look.
do?
Just take some research to find out what other schools are paying, and then, again, I don't know how other systems are calculating their rates.
Exactly.
You know, they might say, well, the school's always going to pay this higher rate because of this reason. I don't know.
That's worth a look.
Yeah, it might take more than the 2 weeks we have between now and the annual meeting. That sounds like a pretty large rate study, but a good question. Not trying to discount that.
Is there somebody within Richmond, our municipality that are looking at abnormal bills that would catch their attention and bring it to someone?
What do you mean?
Like I think this is pretty abnormal. The bill that was just presented. Are there any other bills, even residential and commercial school government, that are like, wow, why is this?
Well, I mean, it might be a change between 17 and 22, but as long as we're following the rates that were set, then the 22 bill is accurate. So is the 17. It just might be the way that it was calculated in 17 was different. And again, I don't know when we went to sort of that. This methodology was roughly in place when I started in, I guess it was in 2019 was my first pass of these rates. And it seemed to be in basically this format. I just tried to like make the spreadsheet make a little more sense. But in 2017 for these rates, that might have been before the commission looked at everything and changed. So I don't really know.
Denise, if you have a drastic difference within like a month or two, like we had a big one at the farm, they did note that on our bill when it was like close together.
Right.
But this gap of years, I don't think they would notice, but they do write something on your bill if you have a major difference.
Karen?
Just a question for your statutory situation with establishing a rate at this time of, for your annual meeting. Do you have the ability to reevaluate 6 months in and potentially reduce a rate? If you so see that once you get the meters installed and you're starting to measure your septage and stuff like that, or are you set in a rate when you set it for the year? What's the statutory allowance for that? Because you can make the decision now because you don't know how much the whole honey-do list is going to cost you. And then, 6 months in, have an idea that it either costs you a lot more or costs you less. So you're either gonna maintain these rates for the rest of the year, or you potentially can reduce them. I mean, you have quarterly financial reporting. Is there any reason you couldn't look at it 6 months in?
Well, I know we did ask that question a while ago over the attorney, and I want to look back at his answer before I give a definitive answer, but I believe he said we could make a mid-year adjustment if you wanted to. I think it gets a bit complicated to do a mid-year adjustment. But I don't think there's a statute per se that would prohibit that.
Because my only reason for saying that is every year we come back and you say, I don't want to reduce the rates in case we got a major thing going to happen. And so we got to keep the rates up there and keep putting the money in. And then then we don't want to buy down rates with the extra money that you've received. So that's all I'm saying is maybe midway through you make that evaluation. So it's not an annual thing where you're saying, well, we don't want to use our excess money to buy down rates and then have rates go up next year. So we want to stabilize our rates. Well,
so at least in last year, and I think in the year prior, we did use some of the unassigned funds in both water and in wastewater, and we've been steadily increasing the amount that we've expected to come in from septage. So I think every year we have been more aggressive in putting more into the budget to offset those rates, and I think this year is a really big anomaly that we're actually looking at things that we have to do going forward. Because I mean, not to keep throwing Kendall under the bus, but I remember my first few years here, it would be, well, so listen, so we would sit down and look at the rates and or the budget. So, well, what do you want to change? Same as last year.
Yeah.
Kendall, something's got to go up. Nope, same as last year. Well, now we're not doing that. So like, and we would sit down and look at wages. It wouldn't always be the same as last year. We would say, well, what are we really going to look at? But that was his initial knee-jerk reaction, was we're just going to keep it the same. And like, it can't be the same. And now we've looked at wages that are going to change. We've looked at inflation that's going to change prices. We've looked at disposal prices, and we still have a large pot of things that we just don't
Well, that's what
really
I'm saying,
know.
is if you go into the budget right now with the information you have, because that's all you can do.
Right.
If 6 months in, you
Maybe
find
we
out your
could change
information
something.
is drastically different.
One way or the other.
Yeah.
Heidi?
Going back to that too, Josh, of changing the rates midstream, I can, counting wise, I think that might be a little bit muddy and hard and difficult for some staff. So the thing that I have been preaching right along is with the commercial being 5 times as much as what residential. And I will preach that until the day is long, that I just don't feel that is right to be sustainable for our business community. And that just because this is the formula that we've always used, there's a lot of things that we always did before, doesn't mean that that can't change, as Jay pointed out too.
Yeah.
We are changing, we are moving forward, and I believe this is a change that does need to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I know that we need to change the dollars to be raised from the group, and that will in turn change
The rates.
the rate. Can we just for grin go up to the dollars to be raised and just for fun, increase the number for the school by an arbitrary amount and lower the amount from commercial? What are we doing? Heidi, keep me honest. We're trying to make school go up and commercial go down, or we're trying to make school and residential go up?
I think it's a school.
Just the school. Okay. So just for grants, what if we double the amount to be raised for the school, just as a thought experiment?
Excuse me, Jay.
Uh-huh.
So as a business owner,
Mhm.
I mean, and I hate to say this, but on the commercial spot, and other business owners speak up if I'm totally out of base, but when we get a hard knock like this, I have to pass it on to the clients. So they're gonna pay it anyway. So, I hate to do that, but we had the COVID all hit, and
Oh,
like
sure.
you're saying about not being able to get supplies, we're in the same boat. And then, so they got that knock of COVID. So now we're looking at the water and it's like, oh my God, and are we gonna have to raise our prices again?
No,
So they're gonna pay it anyway.
I know, totally agree with you. What I'm
Yeah.
trying to do is get the ball rolling, because we can talk about the formulas till the cows come home, but we need to actually, because the spreadsheet is driven by the amount to be raised, let's just, as a thought experiment, increase the amount to be raised and then see how that trickles down through the formula.
Connie, go ahead.
Sorry, I've been trying to find something to back up. I can't find anything statutorily in my paperwork right now. But as far as if we can statutorily change the rate halfway through the year, it is not difficult to do at all. I just basically have to change 10 numbers in the system and it's done.
Okay, thank you.
So Jay, I think this is accurate. So what I did was I said, okay, I just pulled these numbers over to the side, doubled the school up to 65, reduced commercial and government by that same amount, kept residential the same, plug those numbers in here instead of using the formulas. And then that gets us to it would be a reduction of commercial and government. They would go down by about 24%. And this is just on the water side. I didn't look at sewer yet. Whereas the school would then increase by about 100%.
Okay, and that the other topic we were bending about was changing the ratio of fixed rate versus meter.
Right.
And so if we were to, then those are the two. So if we were to just say meter fixed rate is going to drop by a third to 30%, meter would go up to 70. What effect does that have at the end?
I think the other way around though, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You want to do more on meter, right? Okay. So then, yeah, fixed rate goes down quite a bit. And
How does the meter? Okay, can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the reason we always went with lower metered water was because of the people that were using high water, like the hair salon, the daycare, the bakery, the brewery, all of them, to be able to be competitive with other towns. That is why we kept that metered rate down versus the other,
So Jen, she wasn't asking to do what you just did.
I'm trying to model, yeah,
understand.
so change what I just did to reflect what you want, just for grins.
She didn't want to change between the fixed rate.
Okay, then put it back the way it was. We're just changing the school versus theaters. Okay,
Glad you're driving
Does
this
that,
bus.
does you understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
Okay, on the meter.
Okay, so if we double the amount to be raised to the school, and we lower commercial by the same exact amount, and we don't touch anything else.
yeah, that,
Go ahead, Connie. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Sorry, I didn't put it down.
Oh, okay.
so, yeah, I think Jay, the only thing I'd want to, I mean, I think this is actually, we might want to just adjust the percentage somehow. But I can use this as sort of a worksheet,
Well, again,
get some ideas.
I'm trying to.
No,
say-
it's spurring ideas. I just wanted to say, like, I might look at this and say, oh, let's tweak it here to get to the same outcome.
Yeah.
Now, I want to make one other quick comment. I know that clock is ticking. We have 17 minutes until some cranky select board chairman gets upset. If we need to have these rates ready by the annual meeting and sometime before that, right?
Well, not necessarily. So we need to hold the annual meeting, discuss the budget, discuss the rates, but there have been other instances where the board wanted more time and they said, okay, well, let's look at these again at the first meeting in May, and you've delayed the vote and the decision. Especially because these won't really be implemented until
July 1.
And actually even later than that, because we're going to be charging the rates for the previous 3 months for actual FY23 rates. So these will be, there's some time to go through this and get it right and not rush it by May 16th.
I don't want to rush. What I want to do is for once and for all, because I've been hearing, I love Heidi, but you know, I would like to not have to give her a reason to keep coming back. So if
Things to be doing too.
but you know, I'm trying to be fair to everybody. Heidi is not the only customer in town, but I think there's got to come a point where we set aside some time to just hash this out with nothing else on the agenda. And if what we need to do is have an off meeting, Water and Sewer Commission, where this is the only topic on the agenda, maybe we need to do that.
And I think, the annual meeting could be a great time to do that, because really the only thing, we're going to look at that agenda shortly, but that meeting could really be 2-3 hours of what are we going to do with these rates, and we can give me time to go through and change this spreadsheet and have a discussion there.
Right.
There's nothing else really on that agenda that evening, and it can go for a while if you wanted to.
Hang on. John, go ahead.
Sure. Back to the percentages, the 40-60 split versus the 30-70 like residential. I totally appreciate that that's putting the load on certain businesses more than others. But aren't they the ones that are using more of the water, and doesn't that promote conservation if we put more of the rate on the metered portion?
Arguably.
Why just arguably?
Yes, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. I mean, it seems like that the more that their costs go up because they're using a lot of water, the more emphasis they're going to put on conservation. And likewise, they are the ones that are using more of the water.
Karen?
Could we, is there a way that Connie could like do a draft bill so we could see what the difference would be like for Denise if, because I feel like it's, I don't know, maybe it's just my brain, but like seeing it here, I'm like, well, that does, you know, that seems like a very reasonable idea, John, but is that gonna cause your water bill to go up $5,000 a quarter, or is it gonna cause it to go up $400 a quarter? Because I don't know what your bill is. So I wonder, could we see some numbers like that?
So I about always had this sheet at the bottom, which maybe gets to your question. So what I try to do is look at what's an average bill for residential, commercial, and school. So it's not a real bill. It's basically taking all the residentials and saying, if everybody used the same and paid the same, where would that residential bill be in FY24? And the total combined in water right now, as we have it, is $1,144 versus FY23 was $998. And that's for a year's worth of use.
So you divide it by 4.
Yeah, so I right, you have to divide it by 4 to get to your rate. And I try to break it up between metered and fixed. And again, individual rates will vary based on usage for individual bills, but that's just assuming equal water usage by all residential customers.
To Jay's point, we have about 20 minutes worth of meeting left and about 15 minutes worth of time left. Would it make sense to continue this at an off meeting? And if so, when?
Or do it at the annual
Yeah, I
meeting.
mean, we've got the May 15th meeting, which we can start at 5, and then we have the annual meeting, which will start at 6 with nothing behind it. So in 2 weeks, we have a few hours if you'd like to dive in, and those are already scheduled.
Okay.
And maybe just not bring up maintenance at that meeting. But if we all like to hear it, that's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can talk about the agenda for the Monday meeting, and it could be mostly about rates, and then we'd have the second crack at the apple the next day to talk mostly and develop on that about rates.
That would, that would be my vote.
Aaron?
When we talk about that, because I want to talk more, I've had some more questions about the school, but one of those things is how is the school, where does the money come from in the school budget? But we can talk about that the next time.
We can also invite a school board member perhaps.
Yeah. I just would be interested to know where
Okay,
we'll see that come back around.
Yeah, it'll all, yeah, but like the short answer is taxes. Education taxes.
Are we ready to talk about?
It's being shared by
Yes.
Different towns.
Walton, Jericho, and Huntington.
Right, that's what I was kind of getting.
Are we ready to review the agenda for the annual meeting?
Yes, it sounds like it's going to be rates.
Yeah, gosh, sorry, let me do a real quick reset. All right, do you want to look at the sample agenda, which I think I made mostly about rates anyway?
You knew.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, we had discussed water, wastewater activities the past year, focus on budget and rates, talk about upcoming capital plans and projects, and we can basically make that rates discussion as long as we want it to be.
Yeah, it's not going to be 30 minutes.
No, it'll be longer for sure. But if that looks good as a draft for everybody, we'll publicize that and I'll increase this to like 90 minutes, just we've got plenty of time.
I think you should move the upcoming projects and capital projects to
Move it up.
before the rates.
Yeah.
Because I think people, if they're not going to all the meetings, will want that information before we talk about.
That's a good point.
Yep. And a lot of that too will go back to like those that we know, those that we don't know, and those that we know that we don't know how much it's gonna cost.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Good suggestion.
You want to give us an update on the Gateway expansion project?
Jay, do you have a succinct update? I think we're
We-
still waiting on some
We
things
heard
from the
back, okay,
school.
so for those of you going Gateway Expansion Project, the land trust has met and discussed the idea of altering the current easement that allows, the easement as it stands would only allow water and sewer to come down the hill to serve the reaps,
That parcel.
that parcel. We asked them to consider, could we alter the easement so that we could hook on and go up to the mobile? And Jeremy Hoff came back and said that the consensus was favorable, that they would have to hash the exact specific details out. I think we know that one detail they will insist on is nothing on the other side of the highway. They want to preserve the view shed. They only want stuff on the side of the highway the mobile is on. But we have nothing in writing yet, but we're very grateful that they're entertaining this.
Yeah.
And we did pass it on to the reaps. And I don't know what their status is, but that's kind of where things stand. The reaps have been apprised, and theoretically, if they wanted to move forward with us on getting the bid package out there, that would be, I guess, the next step. When I refer to the bid package, I'm talking about the package to construct the line from the school to the reaps. And the reason we would even be involved is because we want to leverage a grant, and the grant cannot go directly to the reaps. The grant has to flow through us. And so there's a concept of a public-private partnership where we would wind up owning in the end. That line would belong to the town of Richmond, but it would be open to bid. The reaps would bid on it, but as they've said multiple times, if someone else wants the job and bids under them, they would be more than happy to have somebody else do it. You know, they're not going to rig the bid with an artificially low bid to make sure they're going to get it. That really is the next step is, you know, I presume the land trust will continue to discuss internally what they want that easement to look like. But right now, the ball is in the reaps court to decide what you guys want to do.
Thank you.
And is that hooking on to the school's forced main?
Yes.
Well, that's somewhat to be determined though, too, based on what we.
Yeah, we may have to
are
take things
looking-
all the way out to the road because the school's system is not entirely.
Well, I talked with Tyler a little bit and we're part of rural water, so we have the ability, and he thought it might be a good idea. We can get rural water to come in, and I talked to Josh about this. We can actually camera their forced main, and it might be a good thing from the town point of view to get that done before the reaps are required to do a pressure test and find out that something blew apart or something.
Yeah.
So I've been in contact and we can get it done. I'm just trying to get a schedule time to get the camera to come down, and then we'll have an actual, we'll know what we're dealing with there. If it's I've been told that it's partial PVC, partially cast iron. There's been a bunch of breaks, but we can actually get a camera to go down through it. And it would be a benefit for the town and for the reaps to know what they're dealing with before they go any further. So.
Okay.
I thought the mobile tapped out and does not want water and sewer.
The last thing I saw was I saw the land use, some of the land use stuff coming from the state about that parcel that they're looking to tear down their mobile and rebuild. And last I saw, they're still keeping open the idea of hooking onto us.
So that
Thank
maybe
you.
needs to be an agenda at some point.
Yeah. Josh, do you want to talk about the 10% in Vermont program?
Jeff's.
Go ahead.
I might have a relevant comment on the school's water line. When the school upgraded the parking lot, they didn't want to put it over the old water line. So my recollection is that I think the school owns it out to the road, is that right?
Yes.
And so they replaced that line.
The water line or the sewer line?
I don't know.
The water line has all been upgraded
That's what I thought.
to town standards.
So, but the sewer line's not underneath the parking lot.
No,
It's
to the right.
By the side.
And it was put in 1969 from what I heard.
Yeah, and my recollection is when we did the parking lot, there was a lot of really bad fill. There was an old farm, they put the barn, and they just threw it all in the hole.
Oh, boy.
You know, and so like, and that's why it broke a lot. It did break a lot.
Yeah.
That's the way it used to be, though.
Yeah.
But the water line is all good and been upgraded to town standards.
Okay. Shall we just jump? We're gonna just approve warrants and move on.
Yeah. Approval of minutes, warrants, and purchase orders. So we'll start with a motion to approve the draft minutes of the April 17th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Jay.
I second.
Thank you, Aaron. Anybody see any corrections that need to be made to that draft?
No.
So the motion is to approve the draft minutes of the April 17th meeting as presented. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Jay, I.
Morgan, I.
Aaron, I.
David, I. The minutes have been approved. Warrants and purchase orders. Let's start with the warrants.
Doing the purchase orders, so just the warrants tonight.
So can I have a motion to approve the warrants as presented?
I motion to approve the warrants as presented.
Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.
I second.
Thank you, Morgan. Any questions, comments, concerns, or we ready to approve as presented? Sounds like we're ready to approve as presented. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Jay, I.
Morgan, I.
Aaron, I.
And David, I. Warrants have been approved. Discuss items for next agenda. I think rates.
You think?
I think.
It's the budget rates. I'm sure we'll find a few more things between now and then.
So that's it. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
I second.
Motion made by Jay, seconded by Aaron. Calling the motion to a vote. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Morgan, I.
Jay, I.
Aaron,
I'm
I.
first, Steve.
David, I. We are adjourned.